All right, so today you're going to learn how to factor trinomials. So last class we learned that the first step of factoring is to pull out the greatest common factor. And if you take a look at these two trinomials at the top of your paper, we actually can't factor this by pulling out a GCF. So there's another way to factor this. What we do is to factor trinomials, we are going to factor them into two binomials, the two sets of parentheses that were multiplied together to get this. So it's still like this is the simplified expression, and now we're going backwards. So I'm going to start first by just thinking about it with tiles. So remember before, when we were multiplying two trinomials using tiles, we would put one of the factors up here and one of the factors up here, and then we would get this rectangle, right? Well, let's just take a look at what we have here. So the answer is x squared plus 6x plus 8, and that's going to go in this area here. So what we have to do is we have to take an x squared, 6x's, and 8 ones and create a rectangle. So just like before, when we were doing x times x, the x squared would end up in this little corner, right? So there's an x squared tile. So now what I can do, since the dimensions of x squared are x by x, I can put an x tile here and an x tile here. And when I do that, that sets me up for a ones tile. So if you think about it, I'm going to put an x tile right here, an x tile right here, and that sets me up to put a 1. So right now what I have is x squared plus 2x plus 1, but I need 6 x's, right? So let's add another x. Suppose I put the x here, and I put another x here. Well, now I'm up to 4, and when I do that, I now have space for 4 total x's, or 4 total ones, sorry. So I need 8. I need 8 ones, right? Because we're trying to get to this right here, 6x plus 8. Right now I have x squared plus 4x plus 4. So let's go ahead and add another x, right? So let's say I put another x right here. If I do that, that adds room for 2 more x's, right? So now I have 2 options, right? I have now 5 x's, and I need 6 x's. So I have a choice. I can put the x right here, and if I put the x right here, it's going to fit 2 more ones there. If I put the x right here, it's going to fit 3 more ones here. So right now I have 6, I have 6 ones. I need 8. So I just need 2 more. So the place I'm going to put it is right here. So what I'm trying to do is create this rectangle, right? So then I put an x here, and now I have x squared plus 6x plus 8. So now that I've created this rectangle, I can actually get my factors by looking at the dimensions from each side, right? So from here to here, since this rectangle or this square is x by x, this is the length of x. So I could put an x tile right here. Right here, these x tiles that go long ways, these go 1 by x. So the length of this right here is 1 and 1. So I'm going to put 2 ones tiles right there. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. The length from here to here is x because we created that x squared. And then the length of each of these right here, these are all x by 1. So the length of all of these are 1. So I'm going to put 4 ones there. So I have 4 ones that I'm going to put right there. And what I have now is I figured out what my factors were, what I multiplied to get x squared plus 6x plus 8. Right here I have x plus 2 and x plus 4. So my factors, I'm going to go ahead and write them down here. They're x plus 2 and x plus 4. Now, if I wanted to check to see if I was correct, the question right here is how could I check to see if I'm correct? Well, I would use FOIL to see if I'm correct. And so let's just do it mentally right now just to see. If I do x times x, that's x squared. If I do x times 4, well, that's 4x. Let's keep that in our head, 4x. And if I do 2 times x, that's 2x. So I've got 4x and 2x is 6x, and then 2 times 4 is 8. And I'm missing a little parenthesis right here. Okay, let's do one more together. So I've got this trinomial, 2x squared plus 3x plus 1. I have to create a rectangle using just these tiles. So I've got 2x squareds, 3x's, and 1. Your 2x squareds, we're going to start there. They're going to go in the corner, right? I'm going to put an x squared here. I have two choices. I can put the x squared here and the other x squared right next to it, or I can make it go long ways. It doesn't really matter. Because this line at the top is a little bit longer, I'm going to put my x squareds next to each other. So I have an x squared and then 2x squared. So they're my 2x squareds. So now, when I do that, since I have 2x squareds, then I have to put x's along here. There's going to be 1, 2, and 3 x's right along there, and that's going to create space for one whole ones tile. So it's going to look like this. So I'm going to put 1x, 2x, and then 3 x's alongside, and I have a space right here for that 1x tile. And so what I have is 2x squared plus 3x plus 1, which is great because now I can get my factor. So looking at the top I would put an x, I would put an x tile, I would put another x tile, and then a 1 would go right here. On the side, I put an x tile, and I put a 1. And so what I have at the top, my factors, are 2x plus 1, I'm looking at the top, and x plus 1. And so now here it says, now check to see if you are correct. Well, let's check to see if we are correct. We're going to do FOIL. So I'm going to do 2x times x, which is going to give me 2x squared. And then I'm going to do 2x times 1, which is going to give me 2x. Then I'm going to do 1 times x, which is x. And then I'm going to do 1 times 1, which is 1. And now if you look, your middle terms, if you combine them, that gives you 3x. So I'm going to end up getting 2x squared plus 3x plus 1, which is exactly what we want. If you look up here, that's what we started with, and that's what we want. And so these guys are our factors. Now go ahead and stop the video and try the next two completely on your own. All right, so go ahead and check your answers. One thing I want to point out up here is the question where it says, does it matter which factor is on top and which factor is to the left of the product? And the answer is no. And the reason is because multiplication is commutative, right? It doesn't matter if I multiply this times this first or if I multiply this times this. The only thing, if you put this on the side, it would just be long ways, right? Like the picture would just be long more this way. This one, however, creates a square, so it doesn't matter because both factors are the same, so it doesn't really matter. So if you were at all confused on this, before you move on, you want to make sure that you ask for help. All right, now using tiles isn't the most ideal way to factor, but it's a good way to get us started. Like imagine if I had this problem right here, 8x squared plus 18x plus 9. If I were to use tiles, I would have to have 8 of these and 9 of these and then 18 x's. Like it's going to get really big, really confusing, and so we have to have another way to do it. So let's just think about if there are 8 big blue squares that we have to do, what are my options for how they can be laid out? Keeping in mind that they have to create a rectangle or a square. So one way to do it is I could do 4 by 2, right? I could do 4 of them by 2 of them. Or I could do 8 by 1. Those are the only ways that I could lay out 8x squareds to create a rectangle out of those. And now let's look at my ones tiles. If I have 9 little ones tiles, then I have only 2 ways, again, here I could lay those out, because those also make a rectangle in the opposite corner as the x squareds. So one way to do that is I can do it 3 by 3, or I can do it 9 by 1. And that's the only way you can create a rectangle out of the number 9. So now, how does this translate into factoring without tiles? Well, think about if I have this polynomial here and I am trying to factor. think about what is going to be going in these first spots right here. I'm going to go ahead and put circles there. So like, what could I put here and here? And this, if you think about it, these are the first two things that get multiplied together in FOIL, right? And it's got to give me 8x squared. So these two right here have to multiply to give me 8x squared. So the only things I could put there is I can put an 8x and an x, or I could put 4x and 2x. Those are my only options, because 8x times x is 8x squared, and 4x times 2x is also 8x squared. So now the other thing to look at is the last term. So I'm going to go ahead and put boxes here. What goes here? Well, whatever goes here has to give us 9, right? So whatever goes here and here has to give us 9, because those are our last terms. So just keep in mind, this is F, first term in FOIL. This is L, the last terms in FOIL. So the only things that could go there are 9 and 1, or 3 and 3, right? Because those are the only ways we can multiply to get 9. Now, the thing that makes factoring difficult is the middle term. And just a reminder, the middle term is the outers and the inners being multiplied together, okay? So now there's lots of different ways we can arrange these. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So let's go ahead and look. There are actually 6 different ways we could try to factor 8x squared plus 18x plus 9, but only one of them works. So let's just start with the first thing I can try, right? So the first thing I'm going to try to do is, all right, how can I break up 8x squared? And we just got finished saying that one possibility is 8x times x. And then to put this then we're going to look at the 9. One way to break up the 9 is to do 3 times 3, right? So right now we know if we multiply the first terms, 8x times x, we get 8x squared, and 3 times 3 is going to give us 9. Let's go ahead and it's all plus signs in here. So this is a possibility. That's one possibility. Another possibility would be, okay, well, let's say I stick with 8x and x, and the other way to do it is 9 times 1, right? So I could have 8x plus 9 and x plus 1, right? You agree that this would give me 8x squared at the beginning and 9 at the end. Well, then the other way I could do it is 8x and x with 1 here and 9 here, right? So now let's go through. We already know, like we don't have to check our first terms and our last terms because we know that 8x times x is 8x squared and 3 times 3 is 9. And that's true in all of these cases. But what we need to do is we need to figure out, does the middle give me 18x? So what we do is we check the inners by multiplying, right? So 3 times x is 3x. Then we check the outers by multiplying, and 8x times 3 is 24x. And then what do we do with those two terms in the middle? We combine them, right? Because they're like terms, and 24x and 3x gives me 27x. It doesn't give me 18. So this one's not going to work. So let's try the next one. Let's check our inners, which gives me 9x. Let's check our outers, which gives me 8x. Combine those, that gives me 17x, not 18. So it's not that one, right? So let's try this. Let's try the next one. 1x is just going to give me an x. 8 times 9 gives me 72x. That's not going to work, right? Because that's going to give me 73x. So this one's not going to work, all right? So what I've just done is I've tried all the combinations with 8x and x and 9 and with all the ways to get 9. So my other option is, well, let's, instead of 8x and x, let's try 4x and 2x. So let's see. We could try 4x and 2x with 3 times 3 again. Or I could try 4x and 2x with 9 and 1. Or I could try 4x and 2x with the 1 in with the 4x and the 9 in with the 2x. So now let's check our inners and our outers, right? So here I have 6x. Here I have 12x. Now if I combine 6x and 12x, oh yay, that gives me 18x. So this is the right answer. So the factors of this that give me 8x squared plus 18x plus 9 are 4x plus 3 and 2x plus 3. And just to be sure, I'm just going to check the other ones just to make sure. So this has got 18x and 4x. When I combine those together, that gives me 22x. So again, doesn't work. This one gives me 2x. I'm multiplying my outers and inners. And then 36x, right? And that doesn't give me 18. That gives me 38x, right? So the only possibility that worked is this one right here, okay? So factoring can get kind of trying, but as long as you break up your first terms and your last terms, and then check your middle term, you're always checking your middle term by multiplying your outers and your inners together. So let's answer this next question. When factoring algebraically, you must always check your middle terms by multiplying the outers and inners and combining the coefficients. And we're just seeing if we get that middle term. So let's try some. Okay, let's see if we can now apply what we just learned there to a different problem with all these different signs. So I want you to look at all 4 of these problems. If you notice, all 4 of these problems, they all start with 12x squared. And these two end with 15, and these two end with negative 15. The only thing that's different in all of these problems is our middle term is different, okay? So when we start factoring, what we're going to do is we're going to first start by trying to break up the first term and the last term. And then we check our inners and our outers to see if we have the middle term there, because there's only one that's going to work, okay? So let's start by just taking a look at these two. And since they both start with 12x squared and end in 15, let's think of some factors of 12x squared. So factors of 12x squared could be 4x and 3x. We could do 6x and 2x, or we could do 12x and x. Now, one thing to note, you might be thinking, well, what about negative 4x and negative 3x? We are never going to break up the first term into 2 negatives. We are always going to break up the first term into 2 positives. It's just going to make our lives a little bit easier. However, that is not true for 15. 15, we might be able, the last term, we might have to break up into 2 negatives. And we'll talk about when you do that in just a second. So factors of 15, I could start with 5 and 3. Then there's negative 5 and negative 3. And then 15 and 1. Or negative 15 and 1, negative 1, okay? So those are my choices. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to start first by just looking at A, and I'm going to draw 2 sets of parentheses. So I'm going to start here. Now all of this is going to be trial and error, and it might start to get kind of frustrating, okay? So what we're going to do first is we're going to put down our first terms, right? We are trying to get 12x squared. So whatever I put here and whatever I put here has to multiply to give me 12x squared. So I'm just going to start by trying 4x and 3x. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try some numbers for 15. So I can, whatever I put right here and whatever I put here has to multiply to give me 15. So now, one way I know right now that I'm going to use my positives is because if you think about multiplying your inners and your outers together, since the middle term is positive, like this whole problem has just plus signs in it, so my factors here are going to be both pluses. So let's just go ahead and try. Let's throw in a 5 and a 3 here, and let's just see what happens. So now we're going to check my inners. And my inners give me 15x. My outers give me 12x. When I combine 15x and 12x, that actually gives me 27x. So I'm close, but I don't have it. So before you toss out the entire problem, let's leave it and let's just erase the 5 and the 3. I'm going to erase what I wrote for my inners and my outers. So it's a good idea to do these problems in pencil, or if you refuse to use pencil or don't have a pencil, maybe you do your work on a separate sheet of paper. So I had the 5 in the first set of parentheses. Let's just switch the 5 and the 3. And so let's say I put the 3 here and the 5 here. And then let's see if that works. So now I'm going to check my inners. That gives me 9x when I multiply. Then I check my outers. That's going to give me 20x. Oh, look at that. When I combine 9x and 20x, that gives me 29x. So I have it. So now the answer is this. Your factors are 4x plus 3 and 3x plus 5. And it doesn't matter what order your factors go in. You could write 3x plus 5 times 4x plus 3, and it doesn't, just as long as your 4x is with your 3 and your 3x is with your 5, you're good to go. Now, if this didn't work, then what I would choose to do is throw out the 3 and the 5 and try 15 and 1. Okay, and if that didn't work, then that means that the 4x and the 3x doesn't work. So I'm going to try 6x and 2x. If that doesn't work, maybe try 12x and x. So you might have to try lots of different possibilities. Okay, let's try the next one. So the next one, notice that your middle term here is negative. That's going to be helpful, okay? Because think about how you're doing your inners and your outers. You're multiplying and then combining like terms, right? So in this case, since my middle term is negative, that means that when I pick my factors for 15, they're going to both have to be negative, okay? So let's just go ahead, 12x squared. Let's try again, let's just start with 12x squared and let's try 4x and 3x. And we know that if I use 3 and 5, that's going to give me 29, right? But in this case, we would be thinking if these were negative, that would give me negative 29. Well, we don't want negative 29. And then if you remember when we put the 5 here and the 3 here, we got 27, right? Well, that would be if I put negative 5 here and negative 3 here, that would give me negative 27. So I'm going to scratch out the 5 and the 3, and let's just try 15 and 1. So let's go ahead and let's say I put the 1 in the first set of parentheses and the 15 in the second set of parentheses. Now, they both have to be subtraction signs because we're trying to get a negative number in the middle. So now let's check my inners. My inners here give me negative 3x, and my outers give me negative 60x. When I combine that, that gives me negative 63x. So that's not going to work. So it might not be 4x and 3x, but before I throw out the 4x and the 3x, we are just going to erase where we put the 1 and the 15 and just switch places first, like just switch their places. So I'm going to put 15 here. Whoopsie, wrong pen. I'm going to put the 15 here and the 1 here. And then let's erase what I wrote here and check my inners and my outers again. So now my inners become negative 45x, sorry about that, I keep picking the wrong pen, negative 45x, and then my outers, 4x times negative 1 becomes negative 4x, and when you combine that, you get negative 49x. So we have it. This is the answer. My factors are 4x minus 15 times 3x minus 1. And if that didn't work, what I would do is I would throw out the 4x and the 3x, and I would try 6x and 2x, or I would try 12x and x, right? You just got to keep trying until you get it. All right, let's go over to C and D. So for letter C, again, we're going to use the same factors that we used for 12x squared at the beginning. So I'm going to have 4x and 3x. I'm going to have 6x and 2x. I'm going to have 12x and x. Reminder, we're never going to break up the first term into two negatives, okay? However, the last term is negative 15. Think about what you multiply to get negative 15. The signs are going to have to be different, right? So I'm going to have 5 and negative 3 might be an option. I can have negative 5 and positive 3. I can have 15 and negative 1, or I can have negative 15 and positive 1. Okay, so those are my options. So let's go ahead and just give it a try. So I'm going to go ahead and put my two sets of parentheses. Just for fun, I'm going to go ahead and switch, instead of doing 4x and 3x, I'm going to play around with 6x and 2x. And you can start with 4x and 3x, it doesn't matter. I'm going to start with 6x and 2x. The only reason I'm doing that is because we just did 2 with 4x and 3x, and I'm thinking, I bet if I start with 6x and 2x, that might be a better option. So let's go ahead and try 5 and 3. Let's say I put 3 or 5 here, and let's say I put a negative there. Excuse me, and plus 3. So I'm just randomly putting my minus sign and my plus sign in there just to see what happens. So now let's just check. I just know my signs have to be different. So I'm going to put negative 10x because my inners are negative 10x. And my outers, they give me 18x. Now when I combine that, negative 10x plus 18x, well, that gives me 8x. Well, that's great, actually, because what I want is negative 8x. And so what I did is I have the right middle term, I have the right factors, I just have the signs in the wrong place. So if that happens, if you get the right number, but the wrong signs, then all you have to do is switch your signs. And so I'm going to put the minus sign here, darn it, minus sign here, and the plus sign here. And now my inners become positive 10x and negative 18x. And so now 10x and negative 18 give me negative 8x. And there are my factors. All right. Let's move on to the next one. So let's go ahead. I'm going to stick again with 6x and 2x just to see what happens. So I'm going to start with 6x and 2x. And I am going to just go ahead and put in my signs. I'm going to put a plus and a minus sign. I know my signs have to be different because the last term is negative. So let's go ahead and say, all right, let's put 15 here and 1 here. I'm just picking options, right? We haven't tried 15 and 1 yet, so I thought I'd try it, right? So now let's try this. We're going to combine. We're going to multiply here. We get 30x. And then if we do this, we get negative 6x. Well, if I combine that, that's going to give me 24x. And I'm trying to get negative 11x. So that's not going to work. So one thing I can do is I can erase my 15 and my 1. And I could put them in different places, right? So let's say let's just think about this for a second. If I put the 15 here, it's going to get multiplied by 6x. That's going to be a pretty big number. And if I put the 1 here, I'm going to get 2x. So if you think about it, that's not going to work because 6x times negative 15 is actually negative 90, and that's not going to give me negative 11 in the middle. So I'm going to throw out the 15 and the 1, and let's go ahead now and try 5 and 3. So let's say I put the 5 here and the 3 here, and let's just check my inners. This gives me 10x and then negative 18x. Well, if I go ahead and combine that, 10x minus 18x gives me negative 8x. Well, that's not going to give me negative 11, but I'm getting closer. So let's try to just switch the 5 and the 3 and see what happens when I do that. So now let's put the 3 here and the 5 here, and let's try that. This is going to give me 6x. This is going to give me negative 30x. Well, now that got me a little bit further away from negative 11. So I've tried with the 6x and the 2x, I've tried the 5 and the 3 in both positions, and I've tried the 15 and the 1 in both positions. So my guess is probably it's not 6x and 2x. So I'm going to go back now and kick out the 6x and the 2x and try the 4x and the 3x. So let me try my parentheses again. I'm going to erase some weird things here. All right, so let's try 4x and 3x. So 4x and 3x. We know my signs have to be different. So let's say I put a plus sign here and a minus sign here. And let's see if I can get rid of some of these weird things going on here. There we go. Let's say I put the 3 here and the 5 here. And now let's just try it. The inners give me 9x. And the outers give me negative 20x. Oh, I have it, because 9x minus 20x gives me negative 11x. And so there are my factors. Now, if that didn't work, I would switch my 5 and the 3. And if that didn't work, then I'd throw out the 5 and the 3 and try 15 and 1, and then switch those places. If that didn't work, then I'd throw out the 3x and the 4x, and then maybe I would try 12x and x. So this might feel like it's pretty time-consuming, but some problems are going to take longer than others, and the more you do, the easier it's going to get. This just takes practice, and I would suggest, seriously, just keep writing it down, keep trying things until you get it. All right, so right when I started the top section, I told you that some problems are going to be easier than others. These next set of problems are going to be much easier. And the reason they're going to be much easier is because the first term and the last term do not have very many factors. So the last one had so many possibilities that it took us a while. This section's not going to take very long at all. So the only way, if you look at the first term and the last term in all of these, the first term in the first column, they all have x squared. So the only way we can break up x is x times x. We're not going to break it up into x squared times 1 because the middle term has an x on it. And then 6, the only way to break up 6 is, well, we've got 3 and 2. We've got 6 and 1, and then we also can do -3 and -2, or -6 and -1. All right? So now let's go ahead. This one's a lot easier, right? So if I go ahead and I take this first one, I only have one choice for the first part, x times x, right? Now, because it's positive, if everything in the whole problem is positive, your signs in here are going to be plus plus. And already in my head, I know it's 3 and 2. The reason I know it's 3 and 2 is because 3 plus 2 is 5, right? So 3x, if I look at my inners, 3x, and outers is 2x. 3x and 2x gives me 5x. So that one, super easy. We can totally just get it, right? So I'm going to skip over to E for just a moment, right? So for E, notice E, F, and G, they all start with x squared. So my factors of x squared are just x and x, but then they all end in -6. So because the last term is negative, the only way to multiply to get a negative is our signs have to be different, right? So I've got, my options are -3 with +2. I could do +3 with -2. I could do 6 with -1, or I could do -6 with +1. So let's just go ahead and try it. The problem's going to be easier because as soon as I start it, I can do x times x. And then let's just go ahead and try. I'm trying to get -1 in the middle. So let's just try -3 and +2. And I already know that I have it because this gives me -3x and +2x. And -3x and 2x gives me -1. And so if I'd switched my signs at all, then it doesn't matter. Then I still would have gotten it. So again, it doesn't matter as well like what order your factors go in as long as you have x minus 3 is one of your factors and x plus 2 is another one of your factors. So now that you've seen 2 of them, go ahead and try the next 6 problems completely on your own and then come back and check to see if your answers are right. All right, so here are the answers. One thing that I want to mention is that you guys have 2 extra, or I have 2 extra problems. You guys do not have this problem at the bottom or this problem, which means these letters on your paper are different. So this one corresponds with D, this one right here corresponds with E, and this one right here corresponds with F. Now, one thing I want to mention is just pay attention to your signs. So if you look right here, all of these, your last term here was all positive, so we had to multiply a positive times a positive or a negative times a negative. So if you notice, the first 2, it's all addition. The whole problem is addition, so you don't have any sign changes. But here, to get +6, I had to do a negative times a negative to get +6, but then we're trying to get a -5 here, and so a -3x and a -2x gives me -5x. So that's how you know that the signs have to be negative, because this middle term is negative, and you have to multiply 2 of the same sign to get a positive at the end. These at the these over here, since the last term here was negative, we knew our signs had to be different, right? And so then you just have to double check when you do your inners and your outers. One of them is going to have a negative sign and one of them is going to have a plus sign, which technically we're finding the difference of our inners and outers. We're kind of subtracting the coefficients, and so that might be helpful if you can remember that as well. All right. All right, now I want you to take a look at all of the problems that you see that we've done on this paper, right? So if you look, and I want you to just think about the signs of your factors, right? So I want you to think about when the last term is negative, what does that tell you about the signs of your factors? So if you look, all of the problems on the right-hand side of the paper, they all had negative at the end. -15 for all 3 of the ones on the right, and then -6. And if you look at all of your factors, all of your signs were different. You had a positive and a negative. So that's really important to recognize. So what that means is that the signs will be different. And that's a hard and fast rule, right? It's the only way you can get a negative last term is if you're multiplying a negative times a positive. So that means that your factors are going to be plus minus, or they're going to be minus plus. All right. And now let's look what happens if the last term is positive. Every problem in the first column, all of those have positive 15 and positive 6. And what that means is that your signs will be the same. That's so important. Another hard and fast rule. The signs of your factors will be the same. And if you think about it, it's because you're multiplying to get that last term. So if I do a positive times a positive, that will always result in a positive last term. And if I have two factors that are negative, negative, that's going to always result in a positive. So then when you know the signs are going to be the same, it's the middle term that determines if they're both positive or they're both negative. All right. Go ahead and try the next 6 problems completely on your own and just see how you do. All right, I am just going to give you the answers to these problems, but I do want you to try them on your own. But before you do that, let's take a look at C. Notice there's only 2 terms here. There's not a middle term. There's not an X term, right? Like this one has an X term, this one has an X term, this one has an X term. These two do not. What that means is that your middle term is 0. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to break this into something so that your middle term completely cancels out. Same with this. Try to break this up so that your middle term completely cancels out. And then hopefully you start to notice something. These two are actually pretty simple once you notice it. All right? So if you haven't stopped the video, stop the video, try the problems, and then tune back in for the answer. And here are the answers. Notice that letter B, because both of these factors were exactly the same, you could shorten it and write it like this, 2x minus 3 squared. This is the square of a difference, and that's a cool thing to note. The first term and the last term are perfect squares, so that's helpful to know that you might break it up into two of the same thing. And now, another thing, C and E, notice these break into a difference of squares. When that middle term cancels out completely, the only way to do it is if your inners and your outers give you the same number, only opposites, right? Like this gives me 28x, this gives me negative 28x, and so they cancel out. So that's important to know. The only way to break things up like this to get 0 is if you're using the same numbers that you break it up. All right. If you are struggling at all, make sure you are looking for help from someone. Good luck.